Hi, everyone. This is Eric, and today's episode is a very special one. We have guest host Luke Cavanaugh on, and we're real excited about his future in podcasting, and I think you're really going to dig this episode. So enjoy.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to this edition of the Spirit of EQ podcast. I'm your host, Luke Cavanaugh. I'm a new host of the Spirit of EQ podcast, and I'll introduce myself a little bit further and some things about myself as we get into the conversation. But first, I want to introduce my guest today, my friend Zara Shirazi. There are a number of reasons why Zara's on the podcast today, having a conversation with me and for our audience. The first of those is that Zara is a world-class optimist. And we're going to go into the topic of optimism. I have the data to support the claim that she's a world-class optimist, and she has the life story to support that claim. And then we'll take it a little bit further into Zara and I's friendship that we've struck up recently over a period of some time working together and then some time just talking about things we're interested in. It's a connection that spans continents and cultures and political divides to connect in some very human places. And some really interesting connections that we have in our life stories. So Zara, welcome to the Spirit of EQ podcast. Introduce yourself for us.
Thank you very much, Luke. This was the first time that anyone has called me world class in anything. So I feel very proud to be called in optimism. So thank you for that. It's my pleasure to be here. It's very exciting to have this talk with you. And I like to give a little bit of background about myself. I've been grown up in Iran in a very loving family with a lot of entrepreneurial spirit in our family. My father starting to work when he was 7 years old by his own choice, and my brothers and siblings all being influenced by his mindset and the great team that him and my mom made. Growing up, there were both sides of positive and negative that a child can experience, and I think that definitely my personality is a mixture of what I've been going through, what I've been inspired by, and I'm looking forward to exploring different areas of that today with you. One big change in my life has been that I've moved to Sweden 6 years ago, pursuing the new chapter of my life here, and this 6 years has been such experience in many different levels that sometimes I cannot even wrap my head around it, but it just feels extremely lucky to be in this place where I am today and to be able to reflect upon what has happened. Is there somewhere that you'd like me to go into more depth?
Yeah, gosh, there's so much there. Something that comes to mind immediately is, of course, the cultural change, I guess, of moving from Iran to Sweden and what that's meant for you. Really interesting territory there. Let's start with today. What's your business today? What are you doing? What are you doing in Sweden, professionally speaking?
So I can say my professional career title is a brand strategist. I have a struggle with titles as I've been in this pursuit of finding myself and getting to know myself and trying to fit that into a few words. I find it very difficult, but I can say professionally in the past 12 years, my career has led me towards being a brand strategist. Mm-hmm. I think my passion for getting to know people, I have implemented that into a branding agency that I have today called Shiraz and Daryan, and I run it with my partner, and we started from a graphic design and photography studio in Tehran, and as we went on, just by listening to our clients and listening to their needs, we grew into the branding agency that we are today. And I think that is greatly influenced by my love to explore the outside world and to explore other people. What is their visions? What is it that they are passionate about? And I feel that my contribution to the world and to the people who we work and collaborate with is to help them bring their vision into this world. So this is what I've been doing for the past 12 years.
So something that I hear coming through too is the orientation toward purpose. And you and I have been having a conversation about EQ for a little bit of time now. This is an EQ related podcast, and I work with a framework from a company called 6 Seconds. Which has an EQ framework of 8 basic EQ everyday competencies that anyone can learn to improve their EQ and to get better outcomes in their lives, more desirable outcomes in their lives, whatever those are to you. One of those is exercising optimism, which I said we wanted to go into today. Another one is about pursuing noble goals, and that's what I heard coming through too in your orientation toward, how do I want to serve the world? How do I want to serve my clients? Helping their energy come through, helping their brand vision come through. Who are some of the clients that you've worked with in that work?
Oh, that is a very good question. We have had the chance to work with many different countries. We actually counted it recently, and it's more than 20 countries that we have worked with, and many different cities, people with a very variety of background and culture. And that is something I've been reflecting on actually recently. I have always been very interested in culture and learning the differences between cultures, and growing up in a family where my father was constantly dealing with different people, even different countries. So I think in a way we were exposed to different ways of thinking and living. And the reason I think I found that interesting was that I was deeply interested in exploring the world outside of me. And I believe the reason for that was that I was looking for a way to get to know myself. So circling back to the change I've been going through in these 6 years, moving from my country and from the comfort of my family, I think that the need for exploring outside, which always has been in me, was in a way the need for exploring myself and getting to know myself. What am I good at? What are my weaknesses? What is it that I want to change in order to get to the place that I see in the next stage of my life? So having that passion for working with different cultures, that has helped us in working with small to very big organizations, as the way that we got to know each other was working with IKEA, and I got the chance to work with IKEA through doing an internship at an interior design agency here in Vaxjo, Sweden. And I was lucky enough to work with you in the project that we were doing. And IKEA is one of the examples of the big organizations we've worked with, but we have been working with small companies around the world, in Sweden, in Iran, in Spain, Italy, and the industries that we mostly have worked with is lifestyle and health and hospitality. That has been something that has been reoccurring for us.
So let's see, hold that thought. I really want to hold that thought about exploring different cultures and using that as kind of a canvas for exploring yourself. That's super fantastic. A couple of things before, by way of getting back into that. You mentioned how we connected on a project at IKEA. And one thing that comes through about your ability to kind of combine different cultures is that I was working at IKEA at the time, and we were working on an office redesign project for an office that was based in Philadelphia. And one of the fantastic ideas that you came up with, Zara, I think I can describe it in a way, hopefully, that people will understand. But we were looking for some way to, actually, it was your idea, I think, was some way to to combine sort of the IKEA culture and visual image with the culture we have of an office that was based in the Philadelphia area, which, if you've spent any time in Philadelphia, I don't know, this also has its own culture to it, its own culture and pride to it. And Zara came up with this fantastic idea of if you know, most people I think know the person, I call him a man, but I think you're not allowed to call him a man. I think it's been established that he's a non-gendered individual who is in the IKEA instructions, the cartoon guy, I like to call him, who, tells you to stop or is always there in the IKEA instructions. He's one of the most recognizable cartoon characters in the world, I guess, because so many people shop at IKEA. And you came up with this fantastic illustration for the wall of the IKEA man standing on the steps of the Philadelphia Art Museum, looking out over the city with the IKEA store kind of there in the background in the Philadelphia skyline, and then the IKEA man, of course, wearing boxing gloves and his arms outstretched, boxing gloves and trunks, like that iconic image from Rocky. And it was just this really, really fantastic thing that I thought was so much fun. I think it was something we were probably technically not supposed to do according to the IKEA brand guidelines, but I don't work there anymore, so I can't really get I thought it was one of those cases where it was so much better to ask forgiveness than permission because it worked so well. But it was just it really was. I mean, a lot of fun and a great example of your ability to just have, like, based on a 20 or 30-minute conversation, come up with this fantastic idea that integrated different cultures. But then coming back, now I have to kind of reclaim my train of thought here. I talked a little bit about where we connect, a little bit of just about my background before I come back into yours is, I'm from the United States. You grew up in Iran, right? Today I work with corporate communication and change management and EQ development in different types of organizations. Spent a long time working in the IKEA organization and a couple of others with those types of topics. And my career path eventually took me for a few years to Sweden as well, where you are now. And we didn't live there at the same time. But one really interesting fact that is a crossover. You talked about today. You're joining us from Vaxjo, Sweden, on the day when we're recording this, which is mid-November. So in 3 days, my daughter Abby will turn 8 years old, and she was born actually in the town where you're sitting right now.
Oh wow!
Yeah, today we live in the Philadelphia area, but she was born in Vaxjo, Sweden. I don't know, how close are you to the hospital? You must be pretty close if you live in Vaxjo.
Yeah, pretty close. I think it's like a 20-minute walk to get there. So pretty close.
It just brings out November 18th. It just brings out 2015, November 18th, 2015. And it brings, knowing that I'm talking with you in that place right now, just brings back such fantastic memories of 3 or 4 amazing days together with my wife and our daughter and our son. Really, it's a really nice memory for me, and it's a fantastic piece of synchronicity, I think, in our interaction. But yeah, so we connect through, but also the contrast of our backgrounds, me growing up in the United States, you growing up in Iran, that's a contrast. I mean, there's almost, I guess, an elephant in the room, which I don't necessarily ever feel the need to explore with you. But I mean, for most of my life, the leadership of our two countries has been basically, blaming the other for being the whole problem in the entire world, right? And it's not really something I don't really even know the roots of that conflict well enough to have a conversation about it. But I do know that when I started to think about you growing up in Tehran, right? You grew up in Tehran,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah?
Exactly.
Were you in the city, or were you in like the suburbs, or?
Kind of in the northern areas of the city, so not like in the city center. Tehran is very big, so we were living like close to the mountains in Tehran.
Yeah. Yeah. I started looking, I started Googling a little bit about Tehran and just to kind of find the background, how big of a city is it? And I realized I don't really know anything about Tehran. And I'm usually a pretty curious person in matters of, major global cities and things. And I realized like, I'd never seen a photo of Tehran, and it's amazing. Like it looks like, almost like the photos I saw anyway, with the mountains in the background look like some of the big South American cities that I've seen photos of. But I was reflecting on that and thinking, gosh, this idea of, I have the influence of how Iran is framed in my culture in the United States as just, this kind of enemy, a culture that needs to be closed off from the world, that needs to be shut off from the world. It's not really ever something I've actively engaged myself in, but then realizing I've never even seen a photo of Tehran or never actively pursued a photo of Tehran, I realized, boy, that's really had an effect on me. So it's really interesting to hear about it. I think it will be really interesting to hear about growing up there from your perspective. So tell me about that from your perspective and from being in a place that, has had such a powerful entity like the United States saying this culture needs to be closed off from the rest of the world. Did you feel that growing up there or in your adult life there?
Yeah, absolutely. This dynamic between Iran and the US has always been a very big part of anyone's life growing up in Iran. And one aspect that I find very interesting is that Iranian people have a very independent way of thinking when it comes to what is being shared on the news and what is being trying to advertise to them. So I think I really feel proud about how Iranians think, that it's always second guessing something that is being exposed to us. And I think that exists in everyday life of a person living there. And of course, in the news, we are always being faced with this country is the source of all the problems and all the evil that is found in this world. But at the same time, this thought that there is nothing against these two people of these two countries. They are not against each other. It's more of a game that the governments are playing. And to me, growing up with a father who had very strategic thinking towards everything, I think I was able to understand that this is a board game that these two countries are playing. And even if they maybe show that today I'm winning because of this card that I have, another day it could be the other one winning something else. And it's this love and hate relationship almost that these two countries have. So I can say it has been my understanding that America, with all of the things that is being put out about it comes with both sides of the story, having a lot of things are constantly happening in the US. It is the land of following your dreams, but at the same time, there comes difficulties with it. You really need to work hard. You really need to, if you want to follow your dream, you really need to be 100% in it. And I can say that that has been definitely influenced by my family relatives living in the US. My uncle, he moved there maybe around 50 years ago, and we've been in constant contact with each other. He has visited back and forth because his family is Iranian, and we have always heard firsthand kind of news from him, how is it to live in the US as an Iranian? And it is not all the things that you see in the news that is the truth. It is something else that goes on underneath the surface that is being presented. So I think this has been my experience growing up.
Wow, that's super interesting. So what area of the United States did your uncle live in?
In Atlanta, Georgia.
Okay. And is that your father's brother, your mother's brother?
Exactly. My father's brother.
Father's brother. Okay. Super interesting to hear that all of what you said about how you feel that Iranians as a culture maintain this kind of healthy skepticism to understand. It was interesting to hear you talk about your how your father's view, the very strategic view of what was going on, and how he had a really strategic approach to life. And maybe that speaks a little bit to your very clear sense of kind of purpose and goals in your life. Maybe that's all, because we've talked about how you definitely think you got your sense of optimism from your father, right? Maybe also your sense of goal orientation comes from him. I feel like I hear you saying that maybe a little bit, and maybe we can go into that. So tell me, what kind of business was your father in when you were a child?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Look, maybe first I should mention this, that I find our conversation so fun, and it feels so great to be here. I feel like there are so many topics in everything that each of us are sharing that we can go deep into, and I'm just I want to continue talking for hours, but I know that we have a kind of time limit that we want to maintain in our talk. So it's very good that you are putting this structure and giving this a direction, because I want to talk about everything and anything that
believe me, I want to do the same thing. It's like when you're out hiking on a trail you've never been, and you're like, well, I want to go down that one or that one. You eventually have to pick one. Yeah. But thank you for that. I feel exactly the same way. And really, ultimately, there's no time limit to our conversation, right? Maybe this particular one, but we can always come back.
Yes.
But so coming back to the question, what line of work was your father in?
Mm-hmm. So he started I think he was working in a shoe factory that belonged to his uncle, and by working for maybe around 10 years in that industry, he was able to come up with his own way of wanting to do this, and building a network, maybe saving up, and creating trust and credibility for himself. And by the time he was 18 years old, he had his own leather factory. And he has been mostly working in that area for most of his life. But by the time that the unfortunate terrorist attack happened in the US, the World Trade Center, he was of course dealing with different projects at that time. One of them was dealing with Italy, so he had a trade ship with a company in Italy, and at that time, no one wanted to make any deals with Middle Eastern countries anymore. He has had sent, I think, the biggest party of his productions to Italy, and just because of that happening, the people who already signed the contract with him, they said, we have to stop this, we want to send this back. Or he even couldn't get them back because everything was a stop. It was like a shock in the whole process of this. So that was a big hiccup in his work and his career, and that made him transition into more real estate. And till today, even though he is in his 70s, he cannot stop working, and he just finds different projects and different people to work with. And I believe most of his focus is on real estate today.
Okay, so so when you talked about the World Trade Center attack, you were that heavily influenced his business. You were talking about 2001, right? 9/11, I guess. Yeah.
Yes.
And that heavily, I guess, that I think probably the restrictions on Iranian companies doing business with the United States and other countries is probably still restricted today, right? Even. But what I want to pinpoint in your conversation was you first of all, one reflection I have is that sounds, you talked about him working from age 7 in his shoe factory, right? What was it? His relative's his father's shoe factory, or no?
His uncle.
His uncle's shoe factory. Right?
Yes.
It sounds like, and then he did that so well to the point where he had then his own factory. It sounds like an American story, or what we like to think is sort of like an iconic American story. So interesting to hear that commonality in two, cultures that want to sometimes make themselves so different that, the stories of success are really actually exactly the same. But tying back to the optimism piece, I mean, that was his, I guess the time from which he was 7 years old and started to 2001. I mean, we're talking about 40, 50 years there, right? I guess maybe 45 years or something, I guess, to just doing quick math.
Yes.
That's a long life's work. And you talked about how then that sort of almost crippled his business and he had to pivot to something else. You described it as a hiccup in his career. And the real estate, what I see in that is I'm not trying to say you made an understatement. I see optimism. And I see, I guess I want to kind of go into what was that like for him? What do you remember of that when I'm looking at it as, his life's work must have been almost kind of totally destroyed at that point, or significantly affected. Is that right?
Yes, completely. Luke, thank you for bringing more light to this. I think that I'm a little bit spoiled growing up with him, sometimes forgetting how special of a personality he is. But actually, I'm so fascinated by my father's characteristic and by the influence and inspiration that he has had on my life through the whole time that I've been alive, that I've been thinking about writing his biography, and I've started series of interviews with him to try to look at him from a different point of view. And I started thinking about why would a 7-year-old want to willingly go to work and not want to play or just have a relaxed time and be a kid. And I actually asked that question of him in the first time that I brought it up. And his response to that was, I wanted to invite my friends to the movies and I didn't have any money in my pocket. So I realized I have to go to work if I want to do the things that I like. And this is so to put maybe to portray a picture of how his life was and how he transformed it. My father was grown into a poor family at the time, living in very southern parts of Tehran. Tehran and Iran in general, a lot of social classes exist, and where you live is a kind of in relation to your status. Now living in Sweden, everything is so on the same level. Yeah. Everyone is living in such a similar level that to me is becoming very strange that I was living in a country that this much social difference existed. But that is the reality and we cannot change it. So that he was born into a very poor family, and he by the way that he went on with the work process or the career process that I summarized, by the time I was born, we were living in the best neighborhood of the whole country. And to me, that is, apart from the materialistic point of view to it, to me, that is someone who has been able to transform their life to the way that they wanted it to. And I find that extremely inspiring. And the fact that he has always been the strongest person, the most resilience I can find, I have seen in him. And this brings me to the point that you brought up about the hiccup that I mentioned. That, of course, was maybe one of the most difficult things that he has gone through. And of course, it had a very extensive weight on all of us as a family, because one part of my father's way of working and dealing with life was that since he was so passionately invested in his work, that means a lot of that work will come into the family. He was having meetings at home, always on the phone calls, trying to solve problems, trying to like find better ways of doing things. And that means when he goes through such a crisis, the kids also go through it to an extent. And as a kid, that was definitely traumatizing for me to see my father, to see my mom, my brothers, all in such devastation, that so much uncertainty, like what is going to happen. And the most consistent emotion that I remember from that time was that my father was constantly so calm and collected, continuously reminding us that he's going to protect us, he's going to protect what he has provided for us, and that he will not let anyone disturb that. And as a kid, that to me was, maybe it's not fully true, it doesn't need to be fully true, but just to hear him, just to see him going through that stress, but staying this collected person, I think it has had both positive and negative effects on me. And to give you a little bit of glimpse of what has been happening during that time was, this is very emotional for me, so it's difficult to go into it, but I want to give you like a real taste of what we were going through. So during the most difficult time, because this was the biggest party he has sent in his whole career to Italy, of course he always you always loan money to be able to make this production, and then you sell it, and then you pay back the loans. And so this was a big loan that he had received. And this meant if the party is not being sold and you don't know for how long it's going to be stuck in customs and what is it going to be like, how is it going to be back, that means that you are not getting paid for it. And the people who loaned him money, of course, they are like, okay, we cannot just stay here. You need to pay us back in one way or another. And they were coming to our house trying to find him so that they can take him to like the court or to jail. And imagine that, like, one night we're just sitting as a family and there are some people who are trying to like break our door to just come inside. And my father and my brother trying to like escape him in a way. And you don't know as a kid, like, what are these people going to do? They are still human. They are not like violent people. But as a kid, you don't know what's going to happen.
And this is during, just to clarify, so this is what was kind of happening as a result of the disruption of a major deal he had that was disrupted as a result of the 9/11 attacks.
Exactly. Yes.
Excuse me. Wow. That is. I thank you for giving us that glimpse of, and it's on so many levels. To think of how that impacted lives of people who had nothing to do with it, right? Yeah. So and how? So this was happening in front of you, and you had all this going on for months, I assume, or.
Yeah, so the intensity of it was maybe for maybe a couple of months, but the whole story dragged out during years that he had to find different ways to pay off these loans and get back on his feet. And he had a major car accident during this time as well. That didn't help anything. But to go back to the part that I mentioned, that this whole happening and his way of being had positive and negative effects on me. The positive was that, okay, life can get the most stressful way that you can imagine it to be, but you can still stay yourself. You can still stay your true version of yourself and find ways to solve things. That I learned from my father, that I can see today, that when it gets really hard, when it gets really challenging, I can find a little ray of sunlight in me, that just by staying focused, you can get through this. So this has been a major help on many occasions in my life. But on the other side, this has made my father, in my eye as a child, a hero. And I think that I have relied a lot on him and my family for most of my life. And that means that I have not, by the time I was 27 and when I moved to Sweden, by that time, I have not explored myself as a human being, because the comfort that I see in these people around me is so overpowering that I think it takes you to a place of really feeling that life is okay, and whatever happens, there are people who can fix things. And like, this has been my truth as a child my whole life, that whatever happens, there will be my father who will fix things.
Wow. That's amazing, that ability to see. There's a couple of things, a number of things in there that are amazing. The last thing you talked about is that what I'm seeing there is sort of this idea that there's, no matter the situation, there's sort of a light and a dark side to it, maybe. Or a bright and a shadow side, or something like that, right? I want to go back to your description of, how he remained resilient and consistent, or, through a really, really difficult period for him and your family, as his entire life's work was disrupted. And come back to in the 6 seconds model, just for our audience, the piece about exercising optimism. The idea there is not really that, I think a lot of times when we talk about optimism, people may think of that as just being a person who has a sunny outlook all the time, who kind of always sees the bright side of life. And there are people, I guess, who are like that have like a kind of an optimistic set point. There are blind optimists in the world who just kind of choose not to see what's going on. But then, for most of us, optimism actually is a kind of a cognitive type of skill that can be learned. And it sounds like it's something that your father became very good at, whether he was trying to become good at it or not. It's just something that he became very good at in his life. And that's really about, like, when you're encountering, according to the 6 seconds model, the way you would learn to become optimistic, this is something I have to be very conscious of in my life, because I don't have an optimistic set point. I think probably my experience with my father, which we could go into in another podcast, was very much the opposite of many of the things that you described. But in terms of exercising optimism, which we would say in the 6 seconds model, there's like kind of 3 areas to it. One is to say that, it's time limited, that whatever the circumstances are, the feelings that you're experiencing around them will fade. And you have to understand that will happen, and the circumstances probably will change as well. And when we're caught in those circumstances, it tends to be a natural feeling like this is going to go on forever and I'm never going to find my way out of it. But when you can remind yourself that the circumstances will fade, then it kind of brings down the intensity. The second piece of it is that the scope of the issue, even though it can be overwhelmingly huge, as it was in your father's case, there are still aspects of life that it doesn't have actually impact. Like, from his point of view, you were still his daughter. He still had his family, he still had his home, those kinds of things. So if we remind ourselves the things that our problem does and doesn't actually affect, and then the third piece, which it sounds like your father was really, really good at, is the idea that with some effort, I can create a change in these circumstances. So remembering those 3 things and practicing, reminding yourself to practice those things under difficult circumstances, that's how we actually develop optimism. And it gives us a sense of kind of influence over things that are affecting us in the world. And even as you said, even if the only thing you can influence, And boy, he had circumstances that were just global and massive, right? And it could be easily imagine a person, kind of being emotionally crushed under the weight of those circumstances. Like, what did I do to deserve this kind of thing? But you pointed this out. You said that he recognized that even if the only thing he could control was his own attitude toward the circumstances, that's one thing that really can never be taken away. Have you ever heard of the book Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl?
No, I haven't.
Oh, that's a recommendation for you. It's one that I know you would like. And
Great.
It's about he was a psychiatrist who was captured in the Holocaust. He was a Jewish psychiatrist captured in the Holocaust and had his life's work, his thesis, with him in his jacket, sewn into his jacket, and it was taken away. And it's his whole story about how literally everything that could be taken away from him was taken away, but never his attitude, never his sense of that ray of hope. And that was the one thing that could never be taken away. So that mapping that back to the sense of exercise optimism, there is always something that can never be taken away from us as long as we're still, there, as long as we're still alive. And it sounds like your father was a really interesting example of that.
Yes, that is very interesting, Luke, to look at his actions from this point of view, more like of an psychological aspect of his behavior. That is very beautiful. Thank you for showing me how to think about it when I'm thinking about his actions. One of the things that I remember from him, this has been maybe the most common phrase he kept repeating, and it was that the future will be better. So whenever I asked him if I felt that he is a little bit stressed, a little bit in his thoughts, a little bit more quiet than usual, because my father, like you said, he was the exact opposite of someone like rainbows and sunshine from outside. He has been the most, one of the most serious people I have seen in my life. So in being observant of his behavior, if I saw like he is a little bit like in himself, I would ask, how are you? How is like work? What are you doing? What are you feeling? And one thing that was consistent among all of these conversations was that he said that he calls me Baba Jun. In Persian, it means like dear dad. So he calls me by his own name. And he says that Baba Jun, life or future will be better, I'm sure, and you can be sure of it. So to this phrase, I completely know, even when I was a child, I know that this is not the truth. No one knows that future, how will it be? But like you said, it is the attitude to have. It is the attitude of whatever future presents to me, I can stay myself and I get to choose how to interact with that piece of life being handed to me. Yeah. And so that is very interesting.
Yeah, gosh, there's so much to think about there. We have 1,000 things to get to, and only maybe 7 more minutes. So we have to choose maybe one thing we have to choose to get to before we wrap up this particular episode. I can imagine we may have future ones. So tell me about then. You talked about your exploration of the world, kind of. As now I see as a process of sort of maybe moving out from your father's orbit, right? Which your father, for some of us, maybe it's almost like the moon orbits around the Earth, right? But it sounds like in your case, maybe it was more like almost orbiting around Jupiter. Somebody with a very large gravitational pull, right? Because your father was such a powerful figure in your life. And you then made a conscious decision, I guess, to move away and to explore outside of Iran. And you've ended up in Sweden, which I get, you pointed out, which on so many levels couldn't be more opposite of growing up in Iran, I guess, right? So talk about, so then tell me what has that meant for you? What are one or two things that have become different for you as a result of, moving outside of your culture where you grew up and being away from your family and now more on your own?
So I think the most major thing is being exposed to many different people with many different backgrounds. I have studied here in Sweden. That means I was in touch with a lot of international students, and I tried to get myself into as many occasions that I can be involved with interacting with international students, and then trying to run our business parallel to studying, because that is how we run our lives, and I wanted to continue and pursue that. In a way, I feel connected to my father, that my business, my career is so hand in hand going with my personal life, that I wanted to continue and pursue that while studying. So all of these experiences, the need to network in order to be able to establish myself in this new country, and being in touch with both a lot of Swedish people and also a lot of international people, I think that brought the opportunity to observe how people are when they come from different backgrounds. And I think that has helped a lot with looking at myself with more empathy and understanding of it's okay however you are. You don't need to be this perfect human being that you think your father is, and you need to also be. You can be your own way of being. That has been something that has changed majorly for me. And the other one is definitely the fact that I'm away from the comfort of my family. I haven't seen my family for 4 years now, 4 years and a few months now. And that has never happened in my life before. And that has been accumulation of pandemic being part of it, and then another part of it, my own decision of not wanting to go back to be with them, because I felt that I'm in this transition mode, that I need to focus and continue this path, no matter how much I wanted to be in their embrace and smell my mom, or just be with my sisters. But I felt that there will be a reward if I just continue. And it has been very luckily. And I think that going back to their comfort, even though if it was for a few weeks or a couple of months, that would have brought back the taste of okay, life is okay however it is. You don't need to grow out of your shell. You don't need to break this shell that you thought you have built for yourself, and to be able to realize that you are much more than what you thought you are, and to be able to really get to know yourself and to meet your truth. This is where I am right now, and I am extremely happy. And as you see, sad about it.
Yeah, it's thank you so much for sharing that with us. And it's incredible in what I hear and everything you say is this this kind of wholeness of it, right? When you just talk now, when your emotion is coming through and you say, I'm so happy, but also sad. It's sort of the wholeness of it, and how this commitment to your search for growth is really inspiring, I think, and that you accept that it comes with, we have many times when we talk about emotions, we get caught in talking about positive and negative emotions, which I think is not really a way would talk about it, because that almost inherently says, well, we should search only for the positive ones, right? And then the negative ones are bad, and we want to go away from those. The reality is we're always going to feel all of them, right? They're all always going to be present. And there are some that are nice to feel and some that are not as nice to feel, but they all have a function. they all mean something. They all tell us something about how we're experiencing the world. And, that growth is going to include some nice to feel emotions and some not nice to feel emotions. And if we want to pursue that, we have to accept the whole of it. Yeah. Does that resonate with you?
Absolutely. A lot, to a great extent. I think a beautiful aspect of Persian culture is that sadness and sorrow has beauty in it. And that has been something that I have learned from my mom. Like when she was cooking in the kitchen, she could be like serenading a very sad song, but still being in her essence and being in like the fullest version of herself, cooking a very comfort meal for the whole family. So being sad didn't mean all the time that it's a negative thing. It could be like beautiful sadness. That has been something that I've been wondering a lot about. Like you explained, that negative feelings are thought to be negative and are thought to be bad, but it exists. I'm sure in a lot of cultures, different aspects of it exist, that negative feelings can be beautiful and, like you mentioned, in a different way, can complement a positive emotion.
Yeah, and they're part of the whole. And that's really
exactly.
We want to find the whole, and that's what you're on this fantastic and beautiful search for in your life. And I thank you so much for sharing, these glimpses of your story with us, because it's a wonderful story. I want to just give you a chance before we disconnect. I want to give you a chance to just tell us the name of your branding agency that you work with, because right now I actually want to start a company just so I can work with you on branding. I'm so inspired with your story. Tell us the name of the company, and again, just so our audience will know.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much, Luke. I look forward and cannot wait to work more with you. The name of our branding agency is Shiraz and Daryan.
Okay, Shiraz and Dayan, and we'll put that on the screen when we publish the podcast. If anyone wants to get in touch, they can. Zara Shirazi, thank you so much for joining us on the Spirit of EQ podcast today. It's been a fantastic privilege to speak with you.
Thank you very much, Luke. I will forever keep this talk with me, and I look forward to our future conversations. Thank you, Luke.
Bye, Zara.
Hi, everyone. This is Eric again. A couple of things as we've ended the show. We hope you enjoyed it. Hopefully, you're tuning in on a regular basis. We'd love it if you would give us a great review on whatever platform you're listening to the podcast. It's so appreciative and helps us as we try to get more exposure for the work we do and the episodes that we publish, and we're grateful to you as a listener. The second thing is, just remember, our content is for educational purposes only. It's not intended by any stretch to diagnose or to treat anything that may be occurring in your life or anyone else's life that you may be connected to through the podcast. But once again, we appreciate you tuning in to the shows. And as always, we look forward to the next time that we're together. Take care.